Okay, let's talk about management. What we're doing here is we're moving into a new section. The section of management involves chapters 7, 8, and 9. It's basically part 3 of the textbook. And this chapter here, chapter 7, is about management and leadership. It's pretty straightforward, but let's talk about it for a second. Management is one of those things that's certainly evolved over time. In the old days, my parents' day, it would be do this, do that. If you don't do it, you're fired. Much simpler, more hierarchy, and today it's much more collaborative, and we work together. And you've got generations that are different, and you've got to work together, and it's not so top-down driven. We'll talk a little bit about that in this chapter and structures in chapter 8. But things have changed, and management's changed a lot. I think more of it is more empowerment to the employee, the worker, and that is what has been working pretty well. So this cartoon shows that it would be, here's a micromanager. It would be common for someone to have a story about an experience with a micromanager. Has anybody out there ever had a micromanager? Do you know a micromanager? Micromanager is someone who doesn't let people do what they can do, but control everything that they have going on here. There's a couple of words about what a micromanager is, someone who controls quite a bit. But let's talk about how management goes. Again, we're talking about empowerment of employees. I think one of the biggest things in management is to have respect and give people the latitude to be able to do their job and not to stay over them. But how do you do that? There's a kind of a 4-part process in this chapter about how management works. And here it is. The 4 main functions of that management role is you got to plan for it, which is maybe set up a SWOT analysis, see where you are, where you want to go. Figure out how that plan might look. And then there's organizing it, putting it together, and there's a whole section we're going to talk about there. And then how do you lead that? You're making decisions and you're problem solving. And then the controlling it is the question of whether or not it's working. If you don't know that your plans are working or not, what good is it to make the plan? If the plans work, then you've been successful. So let's look at that. Here's 2 slides about planning, or a little bit more diving deeper into what the planning is all about. And this is in the textbook. So what is your strategy to reach those goals? What are those? What kind of metrics? That's what's important in business to understand. If we say, well, we've got a good product, what does that mean? Do we have a sellable product, and what are the numbers that show that? Here's the thing about leading, and you're motivating employees. There's some talk about that this week, about how to motivate employees that have a lousy job. Suppose you can't pay somebody more and you want them to do a better job. Well, you got to incentivize them some way, and that's not always so easy. That's leadership. Organizing those, you got a lot of tools and resources at your control. How do you train somebody? How does somebody know what to do? And then, like I said, the control is whether or not it's working. So we're just going to touch again more on some of these different management roles here. Here's the planning section. We dive deeper into planning, strategic planning, operational, tactical, contingency. What type of plan do we have? I like to think about how would you enter a new market? Think about that throughout these planning stages. How would you enter a foreign market or a new territory? Do you have to, what's the plan? How are you going to do that? Do you need people? Do you need to understand the market? Do you know where you go? Is there tactics like logistics and going into this new market, moving goods or services, product to there? How does that work in operational? And then what happens if something goes wrong? What if the plan is no good? Now, here's another thing about management here and leadership. So this would be the second part in leadership. This is the old school pyramid. I want to say that in chapter 8, we're going to bust this up and we're going to separate it out and we're going to matrix this out. We're going to change a lot of different things. Sections. In the last 20 years, 20 or 30, 40 years, management has changed into different types of structures where it is not always the pyramid. This is not always top management filters down everything here. in the next chapter, we'll take a look at that. But this is kind of the structure, the basic structure that existed for decades before the last 20 years, where we've got a little bit more modern. Businesses are more nimble and have to change quickly and be more adaptive. Some of the skills that people skills have to have is top managers need to have a lot of different skills, and lower managers need to have other certain skills. And I think that organization helps with that there. Next, we talk about different leadership styles. And I think everybody can understand that there's this is a spectrum that suggests that, put this guy over here, that when you're really boss-like, you're make a decision and it's done. And then all the way over on the other side is just pure freedom of letting managers figure out what to do. Obviously, I think there's some type of happy medium depending on what type of business and what type of personality you are. There's a happy medium in between that management really does work. Let's see. The next is controlling. There's that guy. The last thing is whether or not this thing is working, and do you know what your goal is? If we were to enter the new market, has that new market entry sold anything or moved any product or services? Has it been cost effective? It's kind of looking in the rear view mirror as to what you planned on doing. How did that go? If it didn't work, you got to do this feedback loop where you're going back and say, well, let's see, do we need different standards? And did the results not meet up to our expectations, or were they above our expectations or below our expectations? Being below, you kind of have to figure out what you're doing and come back. Maybe it's not even realistic. Maybe that's not something that's realistic here that we tried to do. That's very common, and that's okay. Then you have to kind of go back and see what works and what doesn't. And so this is just the basics on how to set up management. Chapter 8, we're going through a little bit more specific on organizational structures, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.